Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. Iran continues to strike U.S. positions in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia saying the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh was hit by 2 drones.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio addresses Americans in the Middle East, the latest advisories and warnings as Iranian strikes intensify.
Israel escalates strikes on both the Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon and others. Prime Minister Netanyahu calling President Trump the leader of the free world.
The Trump administration set to brief both chambers of Congress on Iran. This comes as Congress is considering a vote on a war powers resolution.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Today's Tuesday, March 3rd. You're watching NTD Good Morning. We're continuing with our coverage of Operation Epic Fury, the joint U.S.-Israel operation in Iran that's now entering day 4. Saudi Arabia says the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh has been struck by 2 drones.
The kingdom's defense ministry saying today the attack resulted in a limited fire as well as material damage.
Now, the drone attack comes amid ongoing Iranian missile and drone strikes on Gulf states that host U.S. bases.
Black smoke was seen rising over Riyadh's diplomatic quarter, and that's the area that houses foreign missions. The embassy has issued a shelter-in-place notice for U.S. citizens in Riyadh, Jeddah, and Dhahran, and it also recommends they avoid the embassy until further notice.
Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura oil refinery was also under attack from drones yesterday.
Military spokesperson said the country's defenses downed the incoming aircraft.
And with the Middle East conflict widening, the U.S. has confirmed 6 casualties in Operation Epic Fury. Israel says it completed a broad wave of strikes on Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon.
That's while U.S. forces continue major combat operations against Iran. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley brings us more.
The latest in Operation Epic Fury, a 6th U.S. service member is confirmed dead.
They're true examples of what selfless service means. Our deepest and heartfelt condolences are with their families, their friends, and their units.
U.S. Central Command says it recently recovered the remains of 2 previously unaccounted for service members from a facility that was struck during Iran's initial attacks. That said, major combat operations continue, with the U.S. hitting over 1,200 targets inside Iran, command and control centers, air defense systems, and Navy ships. Pentagon officials said that Iran had 11 ships in the Gulf just 2 days ago. Now they have 0. It's part of hundreds of missions they've already been launching under Operation Epic Fury. But a friendly fire incident on Sunday night. 3 American F-15 fighter jets were mistakenly shot down by Kuwaiti air defense systems during active combat. All 6 crew members ejected safely. U.S. officials also caution that major combat operations are ongoing and more casualties are possible.
This is not a single overnight operation. We expect to take additional losses.
And for anyone helping Iran,
to those who would test our resolve or threaten the United States, our allies, or our interests, understand clearly we can reach you, we can sustain the fight, and we can scale the fight.
The Israeli military says that it hit more than 70 targets in southern Lebanon, all Hezbollah weapon facilities and launch sites. And this comes after the Hezbollah terrorists fired rockets toward northern Israel.
The IDF carried out retaliatory strikes against several Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. We were ready for this.
That's while Iran has targeted Israel and neighboring countries, hitting not just military targets, but civilian infrastructure.
They're hitting hotels. They're hitting embassies. They're hitting airports. They're hitting oil infrastructure.
The tyrants of Tehran target civilians. We target the tyrants of Tehran to protect civilians.
And support coming from Europe.
I really commend what is happening here. Taking out Khamenei, taking out the nuclear capability in Iran, but also taking out the ballistic missile program in Iran. This is crucial. And what I see in Europe, I spoke with all the key European leaders over the weekend, is widespread support for what the president is doing.
Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
And thanks to Jack for that report. And for analysis on the situation in Iran and the wider Middle East, we're joined by David Wormser in Israel. He's an analyst for Middle East affairs with the Center for Security Policy. David, thank you for joining us this morning. From your vantage point in Israel, what have you been observing in the last 24 hours of the war?
Well, the war in Iran has shifted phases. The United States now is bringing in very heavy equipment, which is necessary to start hitting some of the deeply buried facilities. We see the nuclear structures in Arak, which is a plutonium reactor that could produce a whole different track to a bomb, plutonium bombs. And Natanz hit as well. Isfahan has been hit yesterday. That is where the 10 or so bombs worth of uranium is stored, the 459 kilograms has been stored. So that's the 60% dangerous uranium that's already been done. And then last summer, Fordo, which is an underground enrichment, was hit. So we're moving to destroy these underground facilities, also missile silos, missile storage sites, and so on and so forth. The Israelis, on the other hand, it's sort of divided. Eastern Iran is the United States, Western Iran is Israel. Israel has been focused since the beginning heavily on the regime targets and taking down the regime. So what you see last night in the 24 hours, really, the last 24 hours, is the Israelis are very systematically taking out the structures of power and control of the government, police stations, IRGC stations and barracks, morality police stations, and so forth. So people are reporting, even in small towns and neighborhoods, one building where the IRGC had their local police office has been hit, and only that building. So really to take out the regime. But then overall, both sides are working aggressively as possible to remove the missile threat, because we see what the implications of that are for the Gulf countries and for Israel. You have right now on the screen a picture of an Israeli city that was hit 2 days ago and 9 people were killed.
Yeah, David, and in terms of the Iran capability, we did see the embassy in Riyadh get hit. Are there any elements that you're finding surprising that has unfolded since the initial strikes?
Not entirely. I think surprising is the success for the United States and Israel. That is, one always expects worse than what actually happened here. That's number one, and it came at great cost already. Six of our servicemen is 6 too many. But nonetheless, for what has been done, this is an amazing result so far. The second thing that surprises me a little bit is how extensively intertwined the U.S. and Israeli militaries are. They're operating really as one coherent structure. There's a seamlessness that is a high degree of professionalism on both sides, which bodes very well for the future, because such a powerful military cooperation really dominates the Middle East and allows us to somewhat disengage, lower our profile, but also to deter our enemies. Those are the two things. Where Iran is hit, I'm not surprised. Even Cyprus. I'm not surprised that they've been hitting Cyprus, and I wouldn't even rule out that they would hit Bulgaria, because that's where our tankers, our aircraft tankers are based in Sofia. So, but Iran is one, desperate, and two, is trying to expand the circle to create an image of victimhood.
And David, from the Israeli perspective, how are the people holding up? What is life like on the ground there right now?
Very optimistic, very energetic. The Israelis have been through 2.5 years of war. They've been through a lot. They've actually even been through worse than this, well, beyond even October 7th. The last round with Iran was much harder, more missiles. The Israelis feel that now, finally, issues are being solved, that wars are being finished, and they're carried all the way through to victory. Same in Lebanon. Right now, of course, the big concern every Israeli has is that everybody has their kids, their brothers, their husbands, their parents serving in the Israeli military. 200,000 reservists have been called up, which means every family now has somebody in uniform, and they're invading Lebanon because they're dealing with the Hezbollah threat, which is part of the Iran threat. They're dealing with it once and for all after Hezbollah did a truly amazing misstep 2 days ago and started launching rockets into Israel.
So Israeli forces on foot are moving into Lebanon. Do we see any flare-ups happening from Hamas or other potential groups that have Iranian loyalties?
Well, good question. Hamas has all along for the last several months been trying to do some spectacular operation that seizes Israeli soldiers. So every day you have something with Hamas, some squad coming out of a tunnel trying to kidnap a soldier or something like that. But we haven't seen a real uptick in that yet. So no, so far the decision among Hamas has been to sit this one out. Yemen that may be another surprise. I expected Yemen to join in pretty immediately. But Yemen so far is sitting on its hands, which is good news. Part of it is that it worked out deals with Saudi Arabia and other things over the last few months, and it might not want to give up its newfound diplomatic interactivity with its neighbors, while the UAE and Israel, their arch enemies, are establishing bases in places like Somaliland. So there's a game going on in southern Yemen, and the Houthi government there, or the Houthi rebel government there, may be playing that game as a priority over its alliance with Iran right now.
David Wormser, thanks for your insights this morning from Israel.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the U.S. continues to warn Americans in the Middle East to leave as soon as possible. So this does look to be a continuing conflict, and we'll be keeping you updated there. But as Iran strikes countries in the Middle East, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is addressing Americans currently in the region.
That's right. Rubio, he posted a video last night, and as you said, he's advising U.S. citizens that they should leave more than a dozen countries. Here's that story.
At the Department of State, our number one priority is the safety and the security of American citizens everywhere in the world.
The State Department is warning Americans to leave the Middle East immediately.
With what's going on in the Middle East with Operation Epic Fury and the cowardly attacks that we're seeing from Iran against Gulf countries, I wanted to take this chance to speak directly to Americans who are in the Middle East.
The department saying it has ordered the departure of non-emergency U.S. government personnel and family members from Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, and the UAE, citing serious safety risks. The department is also urging all Americans to leave those countries as well as Iran, Egypt, Israel, the West Bank, Lebanon, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Yemen. The U.S. Embassy in Jordan issued a statement Monday saying all U.S. staff have temporarily departed the embassy compound in Amman due to a threat. The U.S. diplomatic mission did not disclose additional details, but the announcement comes not long after Iran-backed Iraqi terrorist group Kataib Hezbollah threatened to attack American military bases in Jordan.
The State Department activated a 24/7 task force, surging personnel and resources necessary to help provide American citizens with up-to-the-minute safety and security information.
Speaking after a congressional briefing yesterday, Rubio said the U.S. was going to strike Iran harder in the coming days.
I'm not going to give away the details of our tactical efforts, but the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now.
Rubio clarifying the U.S. objective is not regime change in Iran, but it is something they would like to see happen.
The objectives of this operation are to destroy their ballistic missile capability and make sure they can't rebuild it, and make sure that they can't hide behind that to have a nuclear program. That's the objective of the mission. That said, abundantly clear, we would love for there to be an Iran that's not governed by radical Shia clerics.
Pressed on how long the U.S. military would remain focused on Iran, Rubio said, as long as it takes. Meanwhile, Rubio said the Trump administration will take action to mitigate rising energy prices as the price of oil spikes. Rubio said Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Energy Secretary Chris Wright would announce the plans today.
This terroristic regime, led by radical clerics, has the ability, potentially, to shut off 20% of global energy. That's the kind of leverage they have because of their Navy. We're going to destroy their Navy. But there is a plan in place. We anticipated this could be an issue.
Energy prices surged after strikes by Tehran forced shutdowns of oil and gas facilities across the region and disrupted shipping in the crucial Strait of Hormuz.
And up ahead, continuing on Israel, escalating strikes on the Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon. And Prime Minister Netanyahu calling President Trump the leader of the free world. Stay with us. Israel is escalating airstrikes on the Lebanese capital today. It says it's targeting areas controlled by the Hezbollah terrorist group.
NTD's Daniel Monahan reports on that, plus updates from Vice President J.D. Vance and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Thick smoke cloaking Beirut's southern suburbs and loud blasts echoing today as Israel escalated airstrikes on the Lebanese capital. A new front in the U.S. and Israel's war on Iran, opening after the Lebanese Hezbollah terror group launched missiles and drones towards Israel. The group is one of Tehran's principal allies in the Middle East. The Lebanese state news agency NNA reporting that at least 31 people were killed and 149 injured in the ongoing strikes. The Israeli military confirming today that it was conducting operations against Hezbollah command centers and weapons storage facilities in the area. Turning to U.S. operations, Central Command gave an update on actions in Iran, saying U.S. forces have destroyed Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps command and control facilities, Iranian air defense capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and military airfields during sustained operations. The military saying it will continue to take what it calls decisive action against imminent threats posed by the Iranian regime. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying action was necessary now because Iran had restarted its nuclear program, speaking on Fox News.
New sites, new places, underground bunkers that would make their ballistic missile program and their atomic bomb programs immune within months. You needed a resolute president like Donald J. Trump to take that action.
Netanyahu saying he met with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago shortly before his inauguration for his second term.
And the first thing that Donald Trump said to me, he said, you know, we have to prevent Iran from getting nukes.
Netanyahu saying there will not be an endless war in the Middle East.
This is going to be a quick and decisive action, and we're going to create the conditions, first for the Iranian people to get control of their destiny, to form their own democratically elected government.
Netanyahu calling Trump the leader of the free world.
So I've been around. There's never been a president like Donald J. Trump. His resoluteness, his decisiveness, his clarity of thinking.
Vice President J.D. Vance says the president has clearly defined what he wants to accomplish in Iran.
He's defined that objective as Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and has to commit long-term to never trying to rebuild their nuclear capability. It's pretty clear, it's pretty simple, and I think that means that we're not going to get into the problems that we've had with Iraq and Afghanistan.
Vance saying the U.S. would love it if whoever comes to power in Iran is willing to work with the United States.
Whatever happens with the regime in one form or another, it's incidental to the president's primary objective here, which is to make sure the Iranian terrorist regime does not build a nuclear bomb.
Vance also addressed the failed talks with Iran on nuclear weapons, saying the regime repeated claims of enrichment for civilian use. Vance says the deeply buried facilities and high level of enrichment showed those claims to be false. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thanks to Daniel for that report. And President Trump is taking to social media to assure Americans that the U.S. is more than ready for a long conflict with Iran.
In a post on Truth Social, the president yesterday said munitions stockpiles have never been higher or better.
He said wars can be fought forever and very successfully using just these supplies. However, he criticized the Biden administration for, in his words, spending all of his time and money and the country's money on Ukraine without bothering to replenish military stocks.
Trump also said he's continuing to rebuild the military, adding the U.S. is stocked and ready to win big. And yesterday, Trump laying out the operation's 4 objectives. NTD Washington correspondent Mari Otsu has the details.
President Trump said that they were projecting 4 to 5 weeks for these strikes on Iran, but they also have the capacity to go much longer than that. And he's saying that at an East Rim event where he's honoring 3 U.S. servicemen with the Congressional Medal of Honor, 2 of them posthumously, and many of those present in the room, families, loved ones, are very aware of the cost of war, especially in the wake of learning that, yes, 6 servicemen are now dead in Operation Epic Fury. The White House, though, is saying that this is not a forever war, and President Trump is laying out his 4 objectives for this mission. Take a look.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis. Second, we're annihilating their navy. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
President Trump also pushing for new leadership in Iran, telling ABC the U.S. had identified possible candidates, but they were all killed in the initial attack.
We also projected 4 weeks to terminate the military leadership, and as you know, that was done in about an hour.
And as for the death of the Ayatollah, President Trump telling ABC, quote, "I got him before he got me. They tried twice. Well, I got him first." Iran has been threatening to assassinate President Trump since 2020 in response to the killing of Soleimani, the Department of Justice bringing charges in an Iranian murder-for-hire plot to assassinate him in 2024. Meanwhile, the White House honoring the U.S. servicemen killed in the operation, vowing to avenge their deaths.
My heartfelt condolences to the families who have lost their heroes, who sacrificed their lives for freedom. Their bravery and dedication will always be remembered.
Today, we grieve for the 4 heroic American service members who have been killed in action and send our love and support to their families. In their memory, we continue this mission with ferocious, unyielding resolve to crush the threat this terrorist regime poses to the American people.
May we prosecute the remainder of this operation in a manner that honors them. No apologies, no hesitation, epic fury for them and the thousands of Americans before them, taken too soon by Iranian radicals.
The administration also pushing back against the narrative that this is a forever war. That comes as some lawmakers prepare to force a vote on a war powers resolution this week aimed at limiting U.S. military action in Iran.
President Trump has also been clear about your fate in either direction. To the media outlets and political left screaming endless wars, stop. This is not Iraq. This is not endless. This is the opposite. This operation is a clear, devastating, decisive mission. Destroy the missile threat, destroy the Navy, no nukes.
Bolstering its case, the White House releasing a partial record of what it calls Iran's decades-long campaign against Americans, from the 1979 hostage crisis in Tehran to the 1983 Marine barracks bombing in Beirut. The list also cites the 1996 Khobar Towers attack, hundreds of U.S. troop deaths in Iraq linked to Iran-backed militias, and more recent rocket and drone strikes on U.S. forces in the region.
Turns out the regime who chanted death to America and death to Israel was gifted death from America and death from Israel. This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it.
There absolutely was an imminent threat. If we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
Meanwhile, President Trump and the Pentagon are continuing to urge the Iranian people to take this opportunity, to take advantage of it, to take back their country and their government.
Thanks to Mari for that report. And in order to gain better historical context into the Iran situation, we're now joined by Jacob Aladort. He's director of the Center for American Security at the American First Policy Institute. He's also a historian of the Middle East. Thank you for joining us this morning, Jacob. I'd like you to provide some historical background on Iran prior to the 1979 revolution. Want to understand sort of what came before the Shah being overthrown.
Absolutely. It's great to be with you. Well, this regime in Iran took over a vacuum basically in the 1960s and 70s. There was a lot of frustration at the time. Obviously, it was a monarchy, and it wasn't obviously domestically without issues at the time. And so it seized on an opportunity and really became the most kind of coherent ideological force out there back in the day. And through the failures of certain thinkers in the United States as well on the left, there was this naive optimism that this was sort of the this was kind of a new form of representation of religious governance that might somehow be aligned with us. Obviously, completely mistaken. This is by many academics on the left and others. But historical analogies are obviously rarely exact. And I think what we've seen and what's really distinct today is that this is a regime that is a world force for terror. That is the objective behind U.S. action right now, is to eliminate the threats that this basically terror organization poses to us through the nuclear, ballistic, and other proxy means. And that is the objective that we are looking towards today.
And Jacob, it seems as if almost there are very similar seeds, if you will, to what happened in Russia with Lenin, where Lenin wasn't even inside Russia until it had brewed to the point where he could kind of go into that power vacuum, as you described it. And we see that in China and in Cuba, where the people who actually helped form a coalition to overthrow the predecessor then get oppressed by that new regime themselves. So can you explain what happened when the Shah was overthrown to those people who actually participated in the regime change?
Yeah, well, I mean, the regime came in, Khomeini's governance, swiftly they created these tribunals, obviously a very brutal and dark chapter in Iran's history that obviously prefaced and presaged the 4 decades that we've seen of repression of tens of thousands of civilians killed and imprisoned. And the thing is, though, you mentioned the historical analogies, and today, you look at all the different global forces that have interests in Iran, the global impact that Iran has from providing missiles and drones to Russia, to its links with the cartels in Latin America and propping up adversarial regimes. So this is a wholly different situation in that there is an acute threat to the American people and to our allies around the world from this regime that is, as the vice president said on Fox, he mentioned, in a way making the fate of the regime incidental to the objectives that we have in eliminating the threats that it poses.
And Jacob, can you take us through the various campaigns that the Iranian regime successfully executed against Americans, including the embassy hostage situation and the others that were significantly impactful?
Well, we have to remember that this is, prior to 9/11, this is the top foreign-based source of terrorism against the United States, particularly the 1983 Beirut Marine Barracks attack that claimed the lives of 241 American service members. There was involvement as well in the USS Cole incident, and thereafter as well. If you look through the record, the targeting of American personnel and soldiers, military personnel, and civilians throughout the region and the world, the firing at bases that have caused many, many deaths, not to mention the attempted assassinations on U.S. soil, as well as of foreign leaders, including the Israeli ambassador to Mexico just in December, as well as on European soil, and of course, attempts on President Trump's life as well by this regime. And so it's vast and it's continuous and it's pervasive. And so I think that is what we're looking at. That is the threat here. Not to mention, of course, the homegrown network of terrorist cells that have been cultivated by the regime for all these decades. So that's just the starting point.
Well, there's so much historical background here. Appreciate you breaking it down for us. Jacob Olador, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So much history to that part of the world and so much intersecting with the U.S., but great to hear a part of that and some significant parts indeed. Thank you so much. Next, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the U.S. is monitoring for any sleeper cell activity in the United States. We'll be breaking down the latest in national security threats ahead. The death toll from the shooting at a bar in Austin, Texas, has risen to 3.
Police yesterday saying another victim passed away as a result of Sunday's shooting.
The Austin Police Department identified the victim as 30-year-old Jorge Pedersen.
Following the shooting, Texas Governor Greg Abbott said authorities are seriously evaluating the possibility of Iranian sleeper cells in the state.
Authorities are investigating a possible terror motive connected to the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
New images show that the shooter's undershirt had an Iranian regime flag on it. The Austin Police Department gave an update on Monday and said more information is expected to be released later this week. Texas Senator Ted Cruz told Fox that on the surface so far, the Austin shooting appears to be a terror-motivated attack.
This is an individual, an immigrant who came from Senegal. He was there, as you noted, wearing a sweater that said property of Allah. He was wearing a shirt with an Iranian flag on it. There was a Koran in the car.
A Department of Homeland Security memo tells law enforcement to watch out for lone wolf terrorist attacks. After the president announced the attack on Iran on Saturday, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said that her department is closely monitoring any potential threats to the homeland. The New York City Police Department has heightened patrols and says it's continuing to closely monitor the situation in the Middle East. NYPD says following the mass shooting in Austin, Texas, and as Jewish communities celebrate Purim, we will maintain enhanced high-visibility patrols to sensitive locations citywide. This is due to the heightened threat environment and out of an abundance of caution. Jason Blair, NTD News.
Thanks to Jason for that report. And joining us now to discuss national security in the wake of the start of the Iran war is Andrew Harding, Senior Associate for National Security Coalitions at the Heritage Foundation. Good to have you with us this morning, Andrew. How do you rate the potential for sleeper cells or lone wolf actors relating to Iran? How concerned should people be?
Well, good morning. It's good to be here. I think Americans should be concerned. Certainly is what we're seeing with Austin and what appears to be on the surface a terror attack related to Iran. This is absolutely something in Iran's playbook, in which Iran, as the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, has actively encouraged those sympathetic to the regime to take out lone wolf or terror cell activities that attack Americans, that are willing to infiltrate within the United States. Certainly when we've had an open border, we have no idea of who to track is coming into the country. And I'm sure Iran's been able to take advantage of some of those opportunities and people in the country. So I think Americans need to be very vigilant, to be very safe, and support local, state, and federal law enforcement with these actions. But it also shows how Operation Epic Fury is very important when it comes to ensuring that the regime cannot have the ability to expand threats into the United States and threaten the American people at home.
And what would that look like for the everyday American leading their lives in terms of supporting efforts to fight back against potential sleeper cells?
Well, the first thing, if you see something, you should say something, ensuring that local and state federal law enforcement are aware of threats, certainly being aware of your emergency numbers, but also then watching your guard as you're moving around your day. Whether that's ensuring if you're on public transportation, you're keeping an eye up from your phone. Maybe that means if you're walking around and you see something suspicious or someone that is nervous or under threat, you're willing to get law enforcement involved or assess the situation. But it's really this vigilance that'll be very important for ensuring communities are safe. And with that support of working with law enforcement, there's great opportunities to ensure that potential conflicts or potential attacks could be avoided.
And President Trump, of course, reminding everyone that the Iranian regime has instilled this ethos of death to America, and those chants have been heard. And he says this particular operation was really to take out the nuclear weapons capabilities of that regime. And in a national security sense, of course, that impacts the U.S. and the rest of the world. But some Democratic lawmakers are saying there was actually no imminent threat from Iran. So, and it also looking at U.S. Foreign policy more traditionally was in positioned to stay out of other countries' affairs. But do you think imminent threat here should be the bar?
Well, I think what's important to note is Iran has been effectively in a conflict with the United States, or has been seeking it for almost 50 years, ever since the regime, the Ayatollah regime, was able to come into power. We know that Iran, as the world's state sponsor of terror, has been actively targeting and killing Americans. The White House just yesterday put out a long fact sheet detailing year after year of examples of Iranian involvement in terrorist activity that has targeted or killed Americans, resulting in hundreds, if not potentially thousands, of American deaths. That's not also to mention the consistent attacks that Iran has had towards Israel and its desire to wipe Israel off the map, as the Ayatollah and his major leadership, senior leadership, has articulated. So this is a country that has been willing to gain nuclear capabilities, ballistic capabilities, to use them, to actively target and hurt the continental United States where it can, but certainly in the region, and also wipe out Israel that had the ability to do so. So this is an active threat, and as Secretary Rubio said yesterday, if we waited for too long, it allowed Iran the ability to have too many overpowering or just such a large quantity of missiles that they can disperse and can continuously be an attack. Right now is an opportunity to prevent that imminent threat from attacking or hurting the United States or Israel for years to come.
And this particular attack on Iran also shifts the dynamics with other potential threats and national security threats around the world. China, for example, has deep ties with Iran, but also has its own ambitions to take over Taiwan, which would present its own threat to the U.S. How do you see the shifting dynamics more globally now?
Well, a few points. First, I think what Iran has experienced is the downsides of a partnership with the Chinese, to where while the United States has been able to work jointly with Israel and have Gulf partners and allies aligned even more closely with the United States in opposition to Iran, China has been willing to maybe give a handful of statements in opposition to the strikes and have called on the U.S. to stop. But that's very different to where we're not seeing a lot of support. Perhaps there's some private support, but publicly China is not really offering Iran the support that's necessary in a time of need. But secondly, it's very important with the energy markets. We know China is heavily reliant on oil from Iran. Roughly a quarter of China's energy resources come from Iran. So the United States is able to prevent that from occurring, whether that's with the Strait of Hormuz, as we're actively monitoring its status and openness, but also preventing Iran's ability to be exporting this oil that's sanctioned primarily into China. It's able to put the Chinese in a more difficult position to have the resources necessary to build up its military, to strengthen its economy, and potentially start any type of conflict in the Pacific. So these moves, while this Operation Epic Fury, is not about China, it certainly affects China.
And looking now at Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war has been going on for 4 years, and President Trump had lamented or tried to tamp down on any effect on the U.S.'s ability to defend against itself in supporting Ukraine there. How much do you think shifting the dynamics with Iran has impacted Russia?
I think the main consideration is that if you are the Russian Federation and President Putin, it should show that the United States is very serious when it wants meaningful negotiations that lead to peace. President Trump offered Iran diplomacy, and Iran refused. As Steve Witkoff said just a few hours ago, the Iranians attempted to strong-arm the Americans in negotiations and indicated that they had enough enriched uranium for nearly a dozen nuclear bombs, and that would be the starting point. That approach clearly has not been successful. Iran did not come with meaningful proposals, and here we are now with Operation Epic Fury as the main option the president has to protect American interests. The application then is that President Putin and Russia should not be misusing negotiations. They need to be coming to the table, be willing to listen to the American mediation efforts that can bring this conflict to an end. I think that's very important in order for us to get to that final step of progress that could see a meaningful solution for peace.
Andrew Harding, thank you so much for coming on this morning. Great to hear your insights.
Thank you.
Well, as Andrew says, Russia, China, all these things waiting in the wings. But here at home, as always, but even more so, if you see something that looks a little fishy, definitely say something.
That's it. And up ahead, the Trump administration set to brief both chambers of Congress on Iran. This comes as Congress is considering a vote on a war powers resolution.
And the first major primary elections of the season are underway. Today, voters in Texas and North Carolina, they'll pick their nominees for the 2026 midterms.
U.S. lawmakers are divided over a war powers resolution that would require Congress to approve any further military action against Iran.
The debate comes as Operation Epic Fury continues and DHS agencies are facing funding gaps. NTD's Chris Bobb has more on that.
I have a war powers resolution that I have before Congress. I'm calling Congress to return immediately to vote on it that basically says no war against Iran. No war against Iran unless Congress votes to approve it.
The Senate is set to debate a war powers resolution led by Senator Tim Kaine, which would require their authorization for further hostilities against Iran as Operation Epic Fury continues. House Speaker Mike Johnson weighing in on Monday, saying he'll be able to defeat a war powers resolution, calling it, quote, a dangerous gambit.
Can you imagine in the middle of this, Congress, ordering, instructing the commander-in-chief to pull out forces and not complete the mission. I'm the head officer of the legislative branch of the United States government, and we are completely involved and informed of what's going on. That's what's required under the law.
Other Democrats, including Senators Adam Schiff and Kirsten Gillibrand, arguing Congress must reassert its war powers.
Congress needs to come back into session and reassert its power over the control of the decision to make war.
But the chamber is divided. Democratic Senator John Fetterman has broken with many of his colleagues, posting, quote, committed Democrat here. I'm a hard no. My vote is Operation Epic Fury. Similarly, in support of the operation, House Democrat Tom Suozzi posting on X that President Trump, quote, briefed the bipartisan House, Senate, and intelligence leadership prior to the strikes as required, committed to briefing the full Congress in the coming days, and he must also seek congressional authorization consistent with the War Powers Act. Suozzi emphasizing his support for the mission, saying, quote, Iran can never be allowed to obtain nuclear capabilities. Even if the resolution passes both chambers, President Trump is expected to veto it. Overriding that veto would require a 2/3 majority, a high bar. At the same time, Republicans are pressing Democrats to pass full funding for the Department of Homeland Security. GOP senators, including Senator Marsha Blackburn, saying, quote, Democrats must end their political stunt and vote to fund the Department of Homeland Security immediately. Preserving our national security has never been more important. Last month, the then acting director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency told a House hearing a DHS funding lapse would make frontline cyber staff work unpaid while adversaries keep operating. It's one of the many agencies under DHS that are currently left without funding. On Tuesday, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kaine will hold a briefing for lawmakers on the conflict. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Chris Bobb, NTD News.
And voters in 2 southern states are headed to the polls today as North Carolina and Texas hold the first major primary races of this election season. NTD's Melina Weisskopf joins us now to break it down. Melina, tell us about some of the major races you're looking at.
Hey, good morning, Steph. So first of all, we're watching Texas's Senate race. While the race is competitive on the Democrat side, the Republican side will likely be even closer. You have 4-term incumbent Senator John Cornyn, who's taking on Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. They're both vying for the Republican nomination for this seat. Now, Trump has said good things about both, but he's endorsed neither candidate so far. Right now, the polls show Ken Paxton actually leading the incumbent Senator Cornyn. While Cornyn and Paxton look favored, there's also Republican Congressman Wesley Hunt seeking the Republican nomination. Democrats are also trying again here to win the Texas Senate seat. They're pushed really hard, remember, back in 2024 to take Ted Cruz's seat. Of course, they weren't able to do that, but now this time around, they're vying to take John Cornyn's seat. You have current Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She's up against State Representative James Tallarico. But, Steph, whichever Democrat wins this primary election, it will likely be an uphill battle for Democrats for this Senate seat because no Texas Democrat has won a statewide election since the 1990s. Now, you also have a few House races to keep an eye on in Texas, notably where Democrats might be more vulnerable after redistricting. One example is in the 34th district. You have one Trump-endorsed candidate, Eric Flores. He's competing against former Congresswoman Mayra Flores for the Republican nomination. They're both vying for a chance to race against Democrat Vincent Gonzalez, who's held that seat for a number of years. Now, you also have North Carolina, the big race to watch watch here is in District 1. There are 5 Republican candidates competing to take on the current Democrat incumbent, Don Davis. Steph.
So, Melina, remind us where redistricting fits into this. How has the landscape changed compared to 2024?
Well, Steph, since these are primary elections, it likely won't be easy to see the impact of redistricting just yet. But for example, we could look to see how much voter turnout has changed to get a better idea of how redistricting has played on the ballot. For example, since Don Davis is uncontested in his primary, we can look to see, has the voter turnout on the Democrat side changed since the last election? That could give us some insight into how redistricting has played on the ballot so far. Of course, but he is uncontested, so that could also play into the fact of whether or not Democrats choose to go to the ballot, choose to take to the ballot for this primary election. Now, Don Davis, his seat is also in danger because of redistricting, Steph. He already had a tight win in 2024, since this is an area that Trump won in 2024. But now Republicans have made this race even more competitive with that redistricting. And you can see that particularly with how many Republicans are now vying for the nomination for this primary election today. Redistricting, like we mentioned, has also caused several seats to become more vulnerable for Democrats in Texas. So after today's primaries, we'll get a clearer idea of just how close those races in Texas will also be, Steph.
Certainly so. Well, thank you so much for the update this morning. NTD congressional correspondent Melina Weitzcup. And a United Airlines flight leaving Los Angeles bound for Newark, New Jersey, had to turn around and return to LAX yesterday.
That's right, a bit of a scare. It came after the plane's pilots reported an engine fire just after takeoff.
A fire alarm went off to alert of an issue with one of the engines on the Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner. On its return, the plane stopped on a taxiway, followed by the more than 250 passengers evacuating on slides and mobile stairs.
Yeah, look at that. There they go down the slides. United said there were no injuries, fortunately, with passengers bussed to the terminal, and then they were put on another plane for the flight to Newark. Flights headed for the airport were delayed for a time. The FAA is still investigating the incident. So stay safe for all those people, and it looks like they averted any kind of injuries, so that's good to see. And we're going to take a short break, but we'll continue our coverage right after this break. Stay with us.
Welcome back. As the Iran war enters its 4th day, another conflict rages on. How does the situation in the Middle East impact the Russia-Ukraine war?
Joining us in studio now is Anna Shvetsova and Stephen Moore from the Ukraine Freedom Project. Welcome.
Great to be with you.
So good to have you both back.
In the living room this time.
Indeed. And much has changed since last time we spoke. Of course, the big one being recently the attack on Iran. And we're going to look specifically here about how the Russia-Ukraine war impacts. They both impact each other. But Russia and Iran have been helping each other militarily. Let's start with how Iran has been assisting Russia.
Well, and listen, I want to point out that we're in a global war right now, and there's shooting wars in the Middle East and Europe. But China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and all the Islamic extremist movements are working together. And so, how has Iran been helping Russia? 58,000 drones, the Shahed drones that Putin sends into Ukraine to kill civilians. Those are Iranian drones.
Yeah.
And so, hey, listen. I don't like to celebrate anyone's death, but there was a certain satisfaction to seeing the guys that had killed so many Ukrainian civilians get their just rewards.
Do you see this attack on Iran as having a major impact on the Russia-Ukraine war?
Yeah, totally. In part because there's a shift from Iran being actively plotting the demise of the United States and Ukraine. If you can get them to not doing that, that's a big win because there's a technological sharing there between Russia. Russia, Iran, and China and Ukraine are the best in the world at drone warfare, and we're not. So taking Iran out of the game and maybe getting some of their technology, they do it cheap, they do it effective. Those Shahed drones are 50,000 apiece, and they're really good at killing people.
And you mentioned how Iran was supplying those that drone capability to Russia, which was attacking Ukraine. What about the Russians? Are they assisting Iran, either previous to the beginning of this operation or even to this day?
Well, I will tell you this. The reason that we're doing this in Iran is because of Russia. Russia built the first nuclear power plant in Iran, and they've been supplying the whole nuclear program since the 90s. And you know who helps them? Hungary. Viktor Orban in 2016 and 2017 trained Iranian nuclear technologists and sent $100 million to Iran to collaborate on a nuclear project. And just as recently September, Hungary said, and this is just a couple of months after the last attack on Iran, Hungary pops up and says, I think it's time to reinstate the Obama-era Iran nuclear deal. So, you know, Orban pretends to be Trump's friend, but you look at what he's doing, and, you know, people from the Chinese regime are patrolling the streets of Budapest, security officers. So he's got this deal with China as well. So you know, this is the global nature of the war we're in.
Yeah. All three regimes, really, you mentioned China, Russia, and Iran, have a kind of stated ambition to reorder the global order and surpass the U.S. In that sense, Anna, coming recently from Ukraine, I believe, do you have a sense that the people in Ukraine are responding positively, or in what way, to the recent strikes on Iran?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'm just back from Ukraine, and President Zelensky was one of the first world leaders who expressed full support to Trump's actions in Iran. We stand with Iranian people, but we don't stand with Iranian regime. Russia bought 57,000 Iranian Shahed drones, which were terrorizing Ukrainian people, which were destroying Ukrainian infrastructure for the past 4 years. Only in February, they sent 5,000 Shahed drones from Iran. So we are happy to have this regime, like, we are happy that this is happening. It's to our benefit. Also, Russia is essentially a gas station with an army. If this war will help to drop the oil prices down, you cut the funding to Russia, and Russia doesn't have funds to finance this war anymore.
You talk about the economics, Anna, of Russia being able to sustain this wartime economy. The last time you were here, you spoke specifically about things that I hadn't realized about the particular targeting of the Christian community and religious leaders in Ukraine. And I want to get an update on what's happening in the ground in Ukraine right now.
In the Putin's last year, end of year speech, Putin said that Russia has Eastern Orthodoxy, this is how he calls Russian Orthodoxy, has more in common with Islam than with Catholicism or other Western religions. And this is exactly what is happening. His regime is closer to Islamic extremist groups rather than to Western values. Currently, we made a movie called A Faith Under Siege. It's about Russia's persecution of Ukrainian Christians on the ground. We recently showed the movie on the Capitol Hill to draw attention to the issue again, because as of now, there are more than 80 pastors and priests killed on the occupied Ukraine. More than almost 800 churches have been destroyed. And we would like this question to be addressed during the peace negotiations. We want the religious freedom to be, religious freedom question to be included to the peace negotiations. Right.
And there has been a lot of controversy even within Russia about the war that Putin has waged. And as you mentioned, Stephen, this aspect of Orban is quite surprising. And I assume there's many people, even within Hungary, that would be opposed to such an alliance. And what's your sense of the people of faith opposing war within that region and how strong of a sentiment that is and what people can even do.
Yeah, so the Orban thing is surprising because he's running for re-election. He's standing next to Trump to gain popularity, but again, Viktor Orban has supported financially Iran's nuclear program to the tune of $100 million, and so in this global war we're in, there's shifting alliances, and we got to keep an eye on those who pretend to be our friends, and so. I don't think anyone wants a war, but I'll tell you a brief anecdote. One of my friends in Ukraine was a software engineer, and he's a strong believer. And then when the war started, he went to go be a chaplain. And he was a chaplain for a year or so. And then he was just so disgusted with what the Russians were doing, he decided the best use of his time was to be a drone pilot. And so now he is taking kinetic action against the Russians, and he's doing very well because he's now commanding several drone teams. And so, there's a point at which you can, you've just got to defend your family, your freedom, your faith, and Russia shut down every church in occupied Ukraine. Not one church is left that doesn't report to Vladimir Putin. And going back to Anna's point about Islam and Orthodox Christian, Patriarch Kirill, who's the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, has said, if you die fighting in Ukraine, all your sins will be washed away. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like something that the Hamas would say or the Iranians would say? So this is a global war. There's a spiritual aspect to it with this weaponization of religion, and it's frankly we have been too soft on. As you guys know, Xi Jinping responds to strength, and Vladimir Putin responds to strength. Yeah. And so good to see we're doing it.
Well, thank you both so much for your time and your insights today. That's all we have time for, unfortunately. Anna Shvetsova and Stephen Moore. Folks, if you want to hear more, you can check out the Ukraine Freedom Project, and there's plenty going on there.
UkraineFreedomProject.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, and we're going to continue our coverage right after a short break. Stay with us here on NTD Good Morning.